The year is 1977. The place Sacramento, California. A city that on the surface seems like any other. Bustling streets, friendly neighborhoods and a sense of community. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something sinister is brewing. A darkness has fallen over the city. The kind of darkness that seeps into the very soul of the community, leaving an indelible mark of fear and uncertainty. An unseen predator stalks the night. He moves silently like a shadow, blending into the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He is driven by a primal urge, a thirst that only blood can quench. This is not a mere compulsion, but a deep-seated need that consumes him entirely. This is not the stuff of fiction, but the terrifying reality of Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento, a man whose name would become synonymous with horror and bloodshed. Chase's crimes were not those of a regular killer. They were marked by a level of brutality and savagery that was almost unimaginable. Driven by a terrifying delusion, Chase believed his own blood was turning to powder. This delusion was so powerful that it dictated his every action. He was convinced that he needed to replenish it. This belief led him down a dark path, one that would leave a trail of devastation in its wake. He needed the life force found only in the veins of others. This gruesome necessity drove him to commit acts of unspeakable horror. His victims were chosen at random. They were ordinary people going about their daily lives, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. They were simply unfortunate souls who crossed his path. Their only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their lives were extinguished in a horrific whirlwind of violence. The scenes of their final moments were so brutal that they left even the most seasoned investigators shaken. The brutality of Chase's crime sent shockwaves through the community. People were left in a state of disbelief and terror, unable to comprehend the horror that had descended upon them. Fear was a constant companion. It lingered in the air, a palpable presence that affected everyone. People were afraid to be alone in their own homes. The sense of security that they once took for granted was shattered. No one knew who would be next. The uncertainty and fear gripped the city, leaving everyone on edge, waiting for the next strike. 6 lives were brutally extinguished by Chase's hand. 6 innocent people, their futures stolen in the most horrific way imaginable. Their names, forever etched in the city's memory, serve as a chilling reminder of the darkness that once gripped Sacramento. His first victim, Ambrose Griffin, was shot in a drive-by attack. This seemingly random act of violence was just the beginning. The monster was only just starting to stir. Teresa Wallin, a young pregnant woman, was his next victim. Chase surprised her in her own home, a place where she should have felt safe. He shot her in cold blood, then subjected her body to unspeakable acts. Chase's horrific acts were not the product of rational thought. They were the manifestations of a deeply troubled mind, one that had been unraveling for years. His descent into madness was gradual, marked by a series of increasingly disturbing behaviors that went unnoticed by those around him. They were born from a mind consumed by delusion, a mind that could no longer distinguish between reality and the terrifying fantasies it conjured. His thoughts were a labyrinth of paranoia and fear, each turn leading him further away from sanity, and ravaged by mental illness. The world around him became a distorted reflection of his inner turmoil, a place where shadows whispered secrets and every corner hid a threat. His reality was a nightmare from which he could not wake. He was a prisoner in his own mind, tormented by voices and driven by compulsions he could not control. These voices, insidious and relentless, urged him to commit acts that horrified even him. Yet, he was powerless to resist their commands. From a young age, Chase displayed disturbing behavior. His childhood was marked by isolation and a growing fascination with the macabre. He was often found alone, lost in his dark thoughts, while other children played and laughed. He was cruel to animals, a classic sign of burgeoning psychopathy. This cruelty was not born of malice, but of a deep-seated need to exert control over something, anything, in a world that felt increasingly chaotic and threatening. As he grew older, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He would wander the streets at night, muttering to himself, his eyes wild with fear and confusion. His actions became more unpredictable. his outbursts more violent. He developed a severe case of hypochondria, consumed by irrational fears about his health. Every ache, every pain was a sign of some deadly disease. He spent hours researching symptoms, convinced that he was on the brink of death. This spiraled into a terrifying delusion. His mind, already fragile, began to fracture under the weight of his fears. He became obsessed with the idea that his body was betraying him in the most horrific way possible. Chase became convinced that his blood was turning into powder. This bizarre belief took hold of him completely, driving him to desperate measures. He was certain that he could feel his life slipping away with every heartbeat. He believed the only way to survive was to replenish it with the blood of others. This delusion led him down a dark path, one from which there was no return. His actions, driven by fear and madness, left a trail of horror in their wake. Chase's descent into madness was a slow and steady decline. As a teenager, he began experimenting with drugs and alcohol, further fueling his mental instability. He was in and out of mental institutions, but his condition continued to deteriorate. He embraced his dark fantasies. He became obsessed with the occult, fascinated by the macabre. He began killing and mutilating animals, drinking their blood in a twisted ritual. This was a horrifying foreshadowing of the atrocities he would soon inflict on human victims. Section 5. Houses of Horror. Chase's modus operandi was chilling in its randomness. He did not stalk his victims or carefully plan his attacks. He simply chose houses at random, breaking in with terrifying ease. His victims were trapped, helpless against his sudden and brutal assaults. Evelyn Mirath, a grandmother, was his next victim. He surprised her in her home, along with her friend Danny Meredith and her 6-year-old grandson Jason. All three were mercilessly gunned down. Chase then took Jason's body with him, adding another layer of horror to his already unspeakable crimes. Section 6. Capture and Chaos. Justice, when it finally came, was swift. On January 27, 1978, after weeks of terrorizing Sacramento, Chase was apprehended. A witness to his final murder reported his license plate, leading police straight to his door. Inside his apartment, they discovered a scene straight out of a nightmare. The walls were splattered with blood. Body parts were stored in the refrigerator. A blender caked in dried blood sat on the counter. It was a scene of unimaginable depravity. Section 7. The Trial of a Monster. Chase's trial was a media sensation. The courthouse was constantly surrounded by throngs of reporters, eager to capture every moment of the proceedings. Journalists from around the world gathered, their pens and cameras ready to document the trial of the century. The world watched in horror as the details of his crimes were revealed. News channels broadcasted the gruesome details, and people everywhere were glued to their screens, unable to look away from the unfolding nightmare. His gaunt appearance and vacant eyes painted a chilling portrait of a madman. Those who saw him in the courtroom were struck by his haunted expression, a face that seemed to tell 1,000 stories of torment and darkness. He showed no remorse for his actions, seemingly detached from the horrors he had inflicted. His emotionless demeanor was unsettling, as if he was completely disconnected from the reality of his monstrous deeds. His defense attorneys attempted to mount an insanity plea. They argued that Chase's severe mental illness precluded him from understanding the nature of his actions, painting a picture of a man lost in the depths of his own mind. They argued that Chase's severe mental illness precluded him from understanding the nature of his actions. The defense team passionately presented their case, hoping to sway the jury with their portrayal of a man who was more victim than villain. The prosecution, however, argued that Chase was fully aware of the wrongfulness of his deeds. They meticulously laid out evidence to show that he had planned his actions with a clear mind, countering the defense's claims of insanity. They painted him as a cunning predator who deserved the full weight of the law. The judge listened intently, his serious expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. The courtroom was tense, every word hanging heavily in the air as the fate of Chase was debated. Section 8. Justice and Finality. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Richard Chase was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. Chase's time on death row was a quiet affair. He remained withdrawn, lost in his delusions. He never expressed any remorse for his crimes. On December 26, 1980, Chase was found dead in his cell. He had overdosed on antidepressants, choosing to end his own life rather than face the consequences of his actions. Section 9. A haunting legacy. Richard Chase's reign of terror may have ended, but his gruesome legacy continues to haunt Sacramento. He is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary life. The families of his victims still bear the scars of his crimes. The terror he inflicted left an indelible mark on the community. Even today, his name is spoken in hushed tones. He is a ghost story, a cautionary tale, a reminder that monsters do exist, sometimes in the most unexpected places.